We are talking Zombie Chronicles Infection Zone, and this is a 2023 low-budget zombie anthology movie directed by Joe Sherlock. I should point out this is not a sequel to the, I think, 2003 movie called Zombie Chronicles, and I initially thought that was the case. I thought it was a sequel to that, but it isn't. It's its own independent movie. Joe Sherlock is a prolific B-movie maker, specialising in kind of grindhouse, low-budget, schlocky fare. I believe I have reviewed one of his movies before. So what is the deal with this one? So it's an anthology. The budget was around $5,000 as far as I can tell. And so we had to judge this film based on that kind of budget and what it could achieve in regard with those resources. It has a wraparound story and then 3 short stories within that. So the wraparound story focuses on this morgue attendant who is effectively on his night shift, and to pass the time he's watching a few kind of zombie films. The first of these zombie films is very short. In fact, they actually increase in length of movie as the film goes on. Each story is longer than the last. The first one, though, is incredibly short and is forgettable outside of, if you like, BBWs. Naked BBWs, to be precise. And this whole film, not just this story segment, has a selection of them. So, yeah, if you're a fan of the that type of lady, there's lots of naked ones in this movie for you, including the first segment, which is about the only thing really of note, I would say. It's just this woman in a shower who gets attacked by a random zombie with no context as to what the zombie is doing there or anything like that. Forgettable. No story as such. The second film is about this guy who's trying to buy illegal organs on the black market to effectively help his adopted daughter, and there again just happens to be a zombie in the forest that causes problems. Again, there's no context about why the zombies are there. They just are. And, you know, so again, there's little kind of like world building within this particular story. I suppose it does have a not exactly a twist, but a kind of a irony in the narrative in regards to somewhat of a kicker, I would suggest. Not a twist, but a kicker in the story is the best way I would describe it. That's kind of fun. So, you know, there's that. But I didn't think there was not a huge amount of actual kind of story. The zombie makeup in this one, I have to say, was rather weak. But again, there's some, you know, there's some reasonable kind of like gore shots. The third one is the longest out of our kind of short stories, and this one, I suppose, has the most narrative flow in it. It follows a couple in a kind of like sequence of when they first are trying to get together and having a child. This woman loses the child, and while she's in hospital, she gets infected by another patient with some blood splatter, and this causes her to slowly turn into a zombie. Although the narrative isn't exactly kind of deep, I actually quite like the fact that it's a kind of progression, and we see the transformation, you know, and the world around it. We do see that there is at least some context in regards to a zombie outbreak. We see news reports in regards to you know, people think it's the flu and all of this kind of stuff. There is some particularly fairly good practical effects in this one. I would say the makeup of all of the films, this one was the most impressive, with this woman slowly getting worse and worse and having pustules on her body, which I think looked pretty good. And, you know, so that was an interesting one. I thought it had the strongest in regards to narrative, even though I don't think any of them had a particularly strong narrative exactly, but this one I would say you could argue, say it does tell a story at least. So there was that, and then we have our wraparound story involving this morgue attendant watching these films who talks to his kind of wife, And I actually quite like the character. I actually quite like the acting in that one, I would say. I think the guy did an actual fairly naturalistic performance, and that was all kind of fun. But then, again, there's not a lot to the story in this one. And then we have this sort of zombie attack when he comes home to his wife and sort of pulls out all her intestines. In a sequence that I think goes on a little bit too long. It's a bit like it lost its kind of punchiness because the camera just stayed on this scene for too long. So it's a mixed bag. I have to say, I think the acting and the kind of the general presentation is mixed, shall we say that. There are a couple of nice little touches I like. For example, the first movie that our morgue attendant watches, he watches on VHS. So the aspect ratio is different compared to the other films, which I just thought was a neat little touch. So there are a couple of things here that I thought were kind of fun. There is a particularly gross out moment in the very first short film, where even though there's not any story in that one, the zombie that does attack effectively pukes blood into this actress's mouth, and it's clearly actually coming from the actor's mouth. And I thought, whoa, that was a bit rough. So it's kind of a bit gross because of that. But yeah, it's all done practically, so hats off to those guys. And considering the total budget was £5,000, this actress did not get paid very much for that. So my hat is off to you. I think the real thing that hurts this movie, though, is there's just not much narrative to it. It's like only in one of the stories, and if you count the wraparound, that's 4 stories, you get any context about the zombie, you know, situation. I'm not sure if this is all supposed to be in the same kind of, same universe, but it really can't be in the story because this guy's watching these films, so they're obviously not all meant to be taking place in the same time because this guy's watching films. And as I said, the first one's an older one on VHS. Yeah, but the other 3 films have no context about why there is a zombie apocalypse. They just seem to turn up out of nowhere, and no one has heard anything about them, which I think hurts the kind of the storytelling in this. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more characterization. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more world building, to be honest with you. It doesn't take much, I don't think. It wouldn't, in fact, the budget, I would say. Yeah, the acting is kind of amateur and somewhat kind of feels like it's relatively quickly turned around, but it does have some good ideas in it here. Like the second at the short stories has a nice little kind of Twilighty Zone element to it, and there's 1 or 2 interesting things that are done, and as I say, the practical gore is impressive for the budget. Overall, how to rate this film? Now, again, we got to view this in the context of the budget of the film, and it doesn't outstay its welcome. It's about 65 minutes long, so I think it was punchy enough. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. For the budget, I think it actually does a reasonable job. It's nothing very demanding, but I think there's some touches here that, you know, I would certainly say, at least for the budget of the movie, certainly gives it a somewhat of a watchability factor. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Please do leave me a comment, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.